Hello there, seeker of silence, and welcome once more to a place where stories wander as freely as the wind across open plains. Tonight, we travel to the wide and whispering lands of Rohan, where tall grasses bow beneath the passing breeze and the memory of hooves lingers long after riders have gone. Here, beneath a sky scattered with distant stars, a lone horseman keeps watch beside a fading fire, carrying with him the echoes of roads traveled and nights that seem to stretch without end. If these quiet stories bring you peace, feel free to subscribe and join us again whenever the world grows heavy and the road calls you elsewhere. Now, let us settle by the fire and listen. The plains of Rohan did not sleep as other lands did. Even in the deep hours of night, when most hearths burned low and voices faded into dreams, the grasslands carried a life of their own. The wind moved in long, unbroken currents, brushing over the endless sea of green and gold, shaping it into waves that rose and fell beneath the starlight. It was there, on a gentle rise overlooking a shallow valley, that a small fire glowed against the darkness. Beside it sat a man wrapped in a travel-worn cloak, its edges darkened by dust and long use. His armor, though dulled with time, still bore the faint markings of the mark, engraved lines that spoke of horse and heritage. A sword rested within reach, not drawn but never far from hand. His name was Edric, once a rider among many, though now he traveled alone. Across from him, tethered loosely near the edge of the firelight, stood his horse, a tall, ash-colored mare whose ears flicked at every distant sound. She shifted her weight now and then, as if listening to something far beyond the reach of ordinary hearing. Edric watched her for a moment, then turned his gaze back to the fire. The flames moved with quiet purpose, bending and rising, feeding on the last of the dry wood he had gathered before dusk. Every so often, a small crack would break the stillness, sending a brief trail of sparks upward into the dark. He had chosen this hill for its vantage, though not for any fear of pursuit. The land here was open and nothing moved unseen for long. Still, old habits remained, shaped by years spent riding patrol beneath uncertain skies. There had been a time when such nights were shared. Voices around the fire, low and steady. The clink of cups passed from hand to hand. The occasional laughter, short-lived but welcome, carried off into the wind before it could linger too long. Now, there was only the shifting grass, the faint warmth of the fire, and the steady presence of his horse. Edric reached beside him and picked up a small object wrapped in cloth. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a simple token, a carved piece of wood, worn smooth along its edges. It bore the shape of a horse's head, though the details had softened with time and handling. He turned it in his fingers, tracing its lines as if recalling something half forgotten. "Strange," he murmured, his voice low, more to the fire than to himself. "How far a man may ride, and still find the same road beneath him." The wind answered in its own way, passing over the hill in a long breath that stirred both cloak and flame. Somewhere in the distance, a sound carried faintly across the plains. Not the cry of any beast, nor the call of a night bird. Hooves. Edric did not move at once. He listened, head slightly tilted, letting the rhythm settle into something certain. It came and went, as though the land itself breathed between each distant step. His mare lifted her head, ears fixed toward the sound. "Yes," he said quietly, rising to his feet. "You hear it too." The fire cast long shadows as he stepped beyond its circle, eyes scanning the darkened stretch of land below. At first there was nothing, only the shifting grass and the pale outline of the horizon beneath the stars. Then far off a shape, a rider perhaps, or the memory of one. It moved slowly, not with the urgency of a messenger, nor the aimless wandering of one lost. Its path followed the old road, the one long faded from sight but never truly gone. Edric stood still, watching. There were tales, of course, whispered in the halls of Meduseld and passed between riders who had seen more than they cared to explain. Of lone figures crossing the plains at night, keeping to roads that no map would show. He had never given them much thought, until now. The shape drew nearer, though still distant enough to remain uncertain. No torch marked its path, no glint of armor caught the light, only the steady rhythm of hooves carried across the open land. Edric stepped back toward the fire, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword, not in fear, but in readiness. The mare shifted beside him as he took hold of her reins, her breath visible for a moment in the cool air. "Easy," he said, his voice calm. "We will see what road has come to meet us." The fire crackled once more behind him, its light stretching outward as if reluctant to let him go. And out beyond the hill, the rider continued, drawing ever closer through the night. The rider did not hurry. Across the wide stretch of Rohan's plains, where distance often played tricks upon the eye, the figure advanced with a steady and measured pace, neither straying from its course nor faltering in its approach. The sound of hooves, once faint and uncertain, grew clearer now, soft, rhythmic, deliberate. Edric remained near the fire, one hand resting against the worn leather of his saddle, the other loose at his side. He did not mount, nor did he step forward to meet the stranger. Instead, he watched, allowing the moment to unfold as the land itself seemed to hold its breath. His mare stood close, her presence firm and grounded. She did not shy nor pull away, but her ears remained fixed upon the approaching figure, her body alert in a way that needed no command. The fire between them burned lower. Its glow, once strong, now flickered in uneven waves, casting long shadows that stretched and shifted along the grass. A final piece of wood collapsed inward, sending a brief scatter of embers into the air before settling once more. The rider came into clearer view. A cloak, darkened by travel and time, moved lightly behind him. His horse, tall and lean, carried him without strain, its steps sure and unbroken despite the uneven ground. No banner marked his allegiance, no emblem shone upon his chest. Yet there was something in the way he rode, a familiarity, not of face nor of name, but of presence. Edric felt it before he could place it. The rider slowed as he neared the hill, guiding his horse up the gentle slope without urgency. When at last he reached the edge of the fire's light, he brought the animal to a halt. For a moment neither man spoke. The night held them there, bound by the quiet understanding that words, when they came, should not be rushed. At last, the stranger inclined his head. "Your fire burns low," he said. His voice carried the weight of long roads, yet it did not falter. It was neither old nor young, but something that had moved between both. Edric gave a small nod. "It has seen its share of wind." A faint pause followed, not empty but measured. The stranger dismounted with ease, his boots meeting the earth with little sound. He rested a hand briefly along his horse's neck before stepping forward into the light. The fire revealed little more than the outline of his features, a face touched by time though not worn by it, eyes that seemed to hold more distance than the plains themselves. A small mark rested near his brow, old perhaps, though its shape was hard to define in the shifting glow. He removed his gloves, tucking them into his belt. "May I share it?" he asked, glancing toward the fire. Edric gestured toward the space opposite him. "If you do not mind its company fading." The stranger allowed himself a faint smile, though it did not linger. "Fires are not meant to last," he said, as he lowered himself to sit upon the ground. "Only to carry us a little further into the night." For a time they said nothing more. Edric moved to add another piece of wood to the fire, one of the last he had gathered. The flames responded slowly, rising again with a soft crack, pushing back the darkness just enough to shape the world around them once more. The stranger watched the motion, his gaze steady. "You travel alone," he said after a while. "I do. Not by chance, I think." Edric shook his head lightly. "There are roads that do not favor company." The stranger seemed to consider this. "Yes," he said at last, "I have walked a few of those." A breeze moved across the hill, bending the grass in a long arc that passed through both men before continuing on its path. The horses shifted slightly, their silhouettes outlined against the dim horizon. Edric studied the man more closely now. "There is something in your bearing," he said. "You ride as one of the mark, yet I do not know you." The stranger's eyes met his. "That may be so." Another pause. "Or perhaps you do in part." Edric did not press him. Instead, he leaned back slightly, resting his weight upon one arm as he looked toward the distant plains. "I have ridden long," he said. "Seen faces come and go, names carried away by time. It would not be the first I have forgotten." The stranger's gaze followed his, stretching out over the land. "No," he said quietly. "It would not." For a moment the sound of the wind returned, filling the space between them. Then, without turning, the stranger spoke again. "Tell me, Edric of the Westfold, do you still ride the old paths?" Edric's hand stilled. He did not reach for his sword, nor did his voice rise. But there was a shift, subtle and unmistakable. "You know my name," he said. "I do." Edric turned his head, studying the man more carefully now, as if searching for something that lay just beyond sight. "And yet," he continued, "you have not given yours." The stranger lowered his gaze to the fire, watching as a small ember broke free and dimmed against the earth. "Names," he said slowly, "are like roads. Some are walked openly, others are remembered only when the time calls for them." Edric exhaled lightly. "That is a long way of saying you will not share it." The faint smile returned, though only briefly. "For now," the stranger replied. The fire shifted again, its glow steady but low. Edric did not look away. "Then perhaps," he said, "you may share something else." The stranger lifted his gaze. "The road you follow." For a moment the wind stilled, and in that stillness the stranger's expression changed, only slightly, but enough to mark the weight of what had been asked. At last he nodded. "It is not a road marked upon any map," he said, "yet it is one that has been walked before." Edric's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in thought. "There are many such paths in these lands." "Yes," the stranger said, "but few that remember those who ride them." The fire gave a final quiet crack, and beyond the hill, the plains of Rohan stretched onward, carrying with them the faint impression of something older than memory. Waiting just beyond the edge of sight, the fire settled into a steady glow, no longer striving to rise, but holding its place against the wide night. Edric shifted slightly, drawing his cloak closer about his shoulders as the wind traced its path across the hill. It carried with it the scent of distant earth and something faintly unfamiliar, as though the land itself remembered places beyond the reach of ordinary roads. The stranger sat across from him, unmoving for a time, his gaze fixed not upon the fire, but somewhere beyond it. "You speak of a road that remembers," Edric said at last. "That is no small thing to claim in these lands." The stranger inclined his head, acknowledging the weight of the words. "It is not a claim," he replied, "only a truth that few have reason to notice." Edric studied him, then glanced out toward the darkened plains. "There are old tracks beneath the grass," he said. "Some laid before the mark was ever raised. Traders, wanderers, even those who fled from wars long forgotten. But time takes such things. The land changes, paths fade." "Yes," the stranger said. "They fade from sight, but not entirely from being." A small pause followed. "There are nights," he continued, "when the wind runs differently across the plains. It does not follow the shape of the hills, nor the turning of the earth, but something older. On such nights, those who ride long enough may find themselves drawn, not by choice, but by recognition." Edric's brow furrowed slightly. Recognition of what? The stranger turned his gaze toward him. "Of a road they have walked before." The words settled between them, carried no further by explanation. Edric let out a slow breath, his eyes drifting back to the fire. "I have ridden many nights," he said. "Felt the wind change, seen lights where none should be, heard distant calls that never came nearer. But I have always kept to the land as I knew it." The stranger gave a faint nod. "And so you remained upon the paths that belong to all." Edric's fingers brushed against the carved token still resting beside him. "And this road of yours, and does it belong to someone?" The stranger's expression shifted, though only slightly. "It belongs to those who remember," he said, "and to those who have been forgotten." The fire dimmed further, its light now a quiet presence rather than a guiding one. For a time neither man spoke. Then from the distance a sound emerged, not hooves as before, but something lighter, a faint, irregular rhythm against the earth. Edric lifted his head, listening. His mare stirred beside him, stepping once, then stilling again as her gaze fixed toward the slope below. "There," Edric said quietly. The stranger had already heard it. Together they turned their attention toward the base of the hill. At first there was nothing, then movement, a shape, small, low to the ground, passing through the tall grass. It did not move with the certainty of a predator, nor the aimless wandering of a creature lost. Its path was careful, deliberate, as though it followed something unseen. Edric rose slowly to his feet. "Stay," he said softly to his horse. The mare did not move. He stepped forward just beyond the edge of the fire's reach, allowing his eyes to adjust to the deeper dark. The shape came nearer, and then as it crossed a patch of open ground it became clear. A fox. Its coat, though difficult to see in full, carried a faint glimmer beneath the starlight, not from color but from motion, as though each step caught the light in a way that did not quite belong to the world around it. It paused at the foot of the hill, its head turning slightly, not toward the fire but toward the stranger. Edric glanced back. The man had not moved, yet his gaze met the creature's without hesitation. For a long moment the two remained as they were, one standing within the faint glow of the fire, the other poised at the edge of the unseen path below. Then the fox shifted. It turned slowly and began to move again. Not away, but across the hill. Its path curved, deliberate and unbroken, tracing a line that seemed to pass just beyond the place where the firelight faded. Edric watched it go. "There is something strange in that one," he said. The stranger rose to his feet. "Yes," he said. "There is." The fox continued its movement, never quickening, never pausing again. It passed through the grass as though guided, its form slipping in and out of view with each rise and fall of the land. Edric took a step forward. "It follows something," he said. The stranger moved beside him. "It does." Another step. The fire remained behind them now, its light reduced to a distant flicker. Edric hesitated, then looked back once more. The hill, the fire, the place where he had chosen to rest, they seemed unchanged, yet distant already. as though they belonged to a moment that had begun to pass. He turned again to the stranger. "You would follow it?" It was not a question. The stranger met his gaze. "I would walk the road it reveals." Edric exhaled slowly, his eyes returning to the fox, now nearly lost among the shifting grass. "There are roads that do not favor company," he said, echoing his earlier words. The stranger gave a slight nod. "And yet," he replied, "some are not meant to be walked alone." The wind moved again, brushing past them with a steady, guiding presence. Edric reached for his reins, his hand steady. "Then we will see," he said. Behind them, the fire gave a final quiet glow, and ahead, the fox continued on its path, leading them towards something neither had yet named. They did not mount at once. The hill fell gently behind them as they walked, leading their horses by the reins, while the last glow of the fire faded into the distance. Before long, even that faint warmth was gone, replaced by the open expanse of the plains and the steady rhythm of their steps. Ahead, the fox moved with quiet certainty. It did not look back, nor did it stray from its path. Its small form rose and vanished among the grasses, appearing again only when the land allowed it, as though it followed a trail laid beneath the surface of the world. Edric kept his eyes upon it. "There are hunters who would call this foolish," he said, his voice low. "To follow a creature with no sign of fear, no sign of hunger. It does not behave as one of the wild." "No," the stranger replied, "it does not." "Then what is it?" The stranger walked a few steps more before answering. "Her guide, perhaps, or a memory taking shape." Edric gave a faint breath through his nose. "That is not an answer that eases the mind. It is not meant to." They continued on. The wind shifted as they descended into a shallow hollow, the grasses growing taller there, brushing against their legs as they passed. The earth beneath their boots felt firmer, less broken by roots and stone. Edric noticed it first. "The ground," he said. "It changes." The stranger nodded. "You feel it?" "It is not the same as before." "No." Edric slowed, pressing his boots slightly against the soil. "It is as though—" He paused, searching for the words. "As though many have walked here." "They have." Edric looked ahead again, his gaze narrowing slightly. "There is no road." The stranger's voice came beside him, steady. "There is." Another step, then another. And slowly, as if revealed not to the eyes but to the knowing beneath them, the shape of something began to take form. Not a path of stone, not even a trail worn into the earth, but a direction, a subtle alignment in the way the grass bent, in the way the ground held beneath their feet, a line that did not impose itself, but waited to be followed. Edric exhaled. "I have ridden these plains," he said, "more times than I can count, and yet—" "You did not come here before," the stranger finished. "No." The fox moved onward, its pace unchanged. The hollow gave way to a narrow stretch of land bordered by low, rising slopes. The sky above seemed closer here, the stars sharper, as though the air itself had thinned. Edric glanced upward. "Strange," he murmured. "What is?" "The sky feels nearer." The stranger followed his gaze. "Some roads pass beneath the world as it is," he said. "Others pass closer to what lies beyond it." Edric said nothing to that. They reached the far end of the hollow, where the land rose once more. The fox climbed first, its form steady and sure. When it reached the crest, it paused just for a moment, its head turning slightly as if to mark their place behind it. Then it continued on. Edric and the stranger followed. At the top, The plains opened again, but not as before. The land stretched out, wide and familiar in shape, yet altered in feeling. The grasses moved, but not entirely with the wind. Their motion carried a rhythm that did not match the air, as though they answered to something deeper. Edric stopped. "This is not the same place." The stranger did not argue. "No," he said. Edric turned slowly, taking in the horizon. "There should be a ridge to the west," he said, "a line of stone broken in two places. I have ridden past it many times. There is no ridge here." "No." A brief silence followed. Edric tightened his hold on the reins. "Then we have crossed into something else." The stranger's expression remained unchanged. "Yes." The word did not carry alarm, only acknowledgement. Edric let out a slow breath. "And the way back?" The stranger glanced behind them. The hollow they had passed through was no longer visible. Only an unbroken stretch of land remained. "The way back," he said, "is not always found by turning around." Edric gave a faint, thoughtful nod. "I had begun to suspect as much." They stood there for a moment longer. Then the fox moved again. Its path led now toward a distant shape, low and dark against the horizon, barely visible at first, but growing clearer with each step. Edric narrowed his eyes. "A ruin," he said. "Perhaps. It was not there before." "No." They resumed their walk. The ground beneath them remained firm, the unseen road holding its quiet course. The wind eased, leaving the plains in a state of stillness that felt neither empty nor heavy, but expectant. As they drew nearer, the shape ahead revealed itself more fully. Stone, broken, weathered, half sunken into the earth. The remains of a structure long abandoned. Edric's gaze sharpened. "There are no such places marked in this part of Rohan." The stranger's voice came calmly. "There are many things not marked." The fox slowed as it approached the ruin, its steps light against the ground. It did not enter at once, but circled along the outer edge, tracing the boundary as though confirming something unseen. Edric felt a subtle shift in the air. Not a sound, not a movement, but a presence. He stopped just short of the first fallen stones. "This place," he said, his voice quieter now. "It does not feel empty." The stranger stepped beside him. "It is not." Edric's hand rested near the hilt of his sword, though he did not draw it. "What stands here?" The stranger looked toward the broken structure, his gaze steady. "A memory," he said. The fox paused at the entrance, a narrow opening between two collapsed walls. It turned once more, its eyes catching the faint light of the stars. Then, without hesitation, it stepped inside. Edric remained where he was for a moment. Then he glanced at the stranger. "You have walked this road before?" The stranger met his gaze. "I have." Edric gave a small nod. "Then lead." The stranger turned toward the ruin, and together they stepped forward, crossing into the place that waited beyond the broken stone. The air changed as they crossed the threshold. It was not colder nor heavier, yet it carried a stillness that did not belong to the open plains. The wind no longer moved freely here. What little stirred within the broken walls seemed to follow its own quiet rhythm, brushing lightly against stone and settling again without sound. Edric stepped carefully over the fallen edge of what had once been an entrance. The ground within was uneven, shaped by time and slow decay. Fragments of stone lay scattered, some worn smooth, others jagged and half-buried beneath the earth. The walls that remained stood only in part, rising just high enough to suggest the shape of a place that had once held purpose. The fox moved ahead of them, weaving between the scattered remains with the same steady pace it had kept since the hill. It did not pause, it did not hesitate. It knew the way. Edric's hand remained near his sword, though his grip was relaxed. His eyes moved across the ruin, taking in every detail. The angles of broken stone, the faint lines etched into surfaces long weathered, the subtle shifts in shadow where no flame reached. "This was not built by our people," he said. The stranger walked beside him, his gaze tracing the same paths. "No. The stone, it is older." "Yes." Edric crouched briefly beside a fallen slab, brushing his fingers lightly across its surface. The markings there were faint, almost lost, but not entirely gone. Lines curved and deliberate, not runes of the mark, not any script he knew. "They do not speak plainly," he murmured. The stranger's voice came from just behind him. "They were not meant to." Edric rose again, his attention drawn forward. At the center of the ruin, the ground dipped slightly, forming a shallow circle where the earth had settled over time. The fox had reached its edge, and now stood still, its body low, its head lifted, waiting. Edric approached slowly. The shape of the place became clearer now. This had not been a dwelling, nor a watchtower. There were no signs of hearth or defense, no remnants of structure meant for living or guarding. Instead, the space held a quiet order, a pattern. The stones, though broken, had once formed a ring. Their placement, though disrupted, still suggested intention, a boundary perhaps, or a place of gathering. Edric stepped into the circle. The ground beneath his boots felt different, not firmer, not softer. But remembered, he stilled. A faint sensation passed through him. Not a sound, not a sight, but something closer to recognition, as though the earth beneath him carried the echo of steps taken long before his own. The fox moved once more, stepping toward the center of the circle. Then it stopped. Its head turned slightly, not toward Edric, nor toward the stranger, but toward the ground itself. Edric followed its gaze. At first, he saw nothing. Only the worn surface of earth, marked by time. Then slowly, as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, a shape began to emerge. A line. Faint, barely visible. But there, he knelt. Brushing aside a thin layer of dust, he revealed more of it. A carving. Not deep, not bold, but precise. It curved gently, forming part of a larger pattern that lay hidden beneath the surface. Edric's breath slowed. "This place," he said quietly. "It was not abandoned." The stranger stepped closer. "No," he said. "It was left." Edric looked up at him. "There is a difference." "There is." Edric returned his gaze to the ground. "Why leave such a place?" he asked. "If it held meaning, if it carried purpose, why let it fall to ruin?" The stranger did not answer at once. Instead, he moved to the edge of the circle, his eyes scanning the broken stones, the faint traces of what had once been. "At times," he said slowly, "a place is not left behind, but set aside." Edric frowned slightly. "For what purpose?" "For the day it is found again." The words settled into the space between them. Edric remained where he was, his hand resting lightly against the uncovered carving. "And we are meant to find it." The stranger met his gaze. "Yes?" Edric studied him for a long moment. "Then this is no wandering road," he said. "No chance meeting upon the plains." "No." Edric let out a quiet breath, not of unease, but of understanding. "You knew this place would be here. I knew the road would lead somewhere." "That is not the same." The stranger inclined his head. "No," he agreed. The fox shifted slightly, stepping back from the center of the circle. Its task, whatever it had been, seemed complete. Edric rose to his feet, brushing the dust from his hands. The air within the ruin felt unchanged, yet something beneath it had moved, subtle, quiet, like the turning of a page long untouched. He looked once more at the carving, now partially revealed. "There is more here," he said. "There is." "Then why does it remain hidden?" The stranger's gaze drifted toward the broken walls, then back to the circle. "Because not all things are meant to be uncovered at once." Edric considered this, then gave a small nod. "I have walked enough roads to know that truth." The fox moved toward the far side of the ruin, its steps light against the stone. It did not leave. It waited. Edric followed its movement, then turned to the stranger. "This place remembers," he said. "As you said the road would." The stranger's expression remained steady. "Yes." Edric glanced once more at the carved line beneath his feet. "And it remembers more than we see." "Yes." A faint breath of air passed through the ruin, stirring nothing, yet carrying with it the sense that the stillness was not empty but watchful. Edric stepped away from the center. "Then we should not remain here without purpose." The stranger gave a slight nod. "No." Edric looked toward the fox, now waiting near a narrow opening at the far side of the broken wall. "It leads us still." "It does." Edric adjusted his cloak, his movements steady. "Then we follow." The stranger turned beside him, and together they moved once more, leaving the circle behind, though its presence lingered, as if the place itself had marked their passing, and would remember it long after they were gone. The opening beyond the ruin was narrower than it first appeared. Two broken walls leaned inward, their edges worn by time, forming a passage that seemed less built than revealed. The stones there bore the same faint markings as those within the circle, though here they were harder to see, half lost beneath shadow and age. The fox slipped through without pause. Edric followed, one hand brushing lightly against the stone as he passed. It felt cool beneath his fingers, though not in the way of night air. There was a depth to it, as though the surface held something older than its shape. The stranger came just behind him, his steps measured, his gaze attentive to the space around them. Beyond the passage, the land changed again. The wide openness of the plains gave way to a shallow corridor, bordered on either side by low ridges that curved inward, shaping the ground into a natural path. The grasses here grew shorter, their movement restrained, as if the wind did not fully reach this place. Edric paused just beyond the opening. "This was not formed by chance," he said. The stranger stepped beside him. "No." Edric's eyes moved along the path ahead. "It guides," he continued, "as the road did." "Yes." The fox moved onward, its form steady, its pace unchanged. Edric glanced back once. The ruin stood behind them, its broken silhouette now less distinct, already blending into the shape of the land. It seemed smaller from here, as though distance had taken more than just space from it. "We move further still," he said. "We do." Edric turned forward again. "Then there is no turning back by the way we came." The stranger's voice remained calm. "No." Edric accepted this without hesitation. They walked. The corridor curved gently, never sharply, guiding their steps without forcing them. The ground beneath remained firm, though it carried a subtle unevenness, as if shaped by long use rather than design. For a time there were no sounds, but their own movement, the quiet shift of boots against earth, the soft presence of their horses following close behind. Then gradually something else emerged, a tone, faint, not a voice, not a call, but something that held a pattern. Edric slowed. You hear it. The stranger nodded. Yes. Edric tilted his head slightly, listening. It was not constant. It rose and fell like a breath drawn across distance, carrying with it a resonance that did not belong to wind or creature. What is it? Edric asked. The stranger did not answer at once. Instead, he listened as well, his gaze fixed ahead. It is what remains, he said after a moment. Edric frowned slightly. Remains of what? The stranger's voice came quietly. Of those who walked this road before us. Edric said nothing. The tone deepened as they continued, not louder but clearer. It seemed to come from the land itself, as though the ground beneath their feet carried something that had not yet faded. The fox slowed for the first time. It did not stop, but its steps became more measured, as if approaching a place of greater weight. The corridor widened, the ridges on either side lowered, opening once more into a broader space. And there, at its center, stood a shape unlike the ruin they had left behind. Edric stopped. This, he said. Before them rose a structure, though not one built in the manner of walls or dwellings. It stood alone, formed of stone that had not been cut, but shaped by time into a single rising form. A pillar, tall, though not towering. Its surface bore markings similar to those within the circle, yet here they were clearer, more defined. Lines that curved and intersected, forming patterns that seemed to shift as the eye followed them. Edric stepped forward. The tone grew stronger here, not louder but nearer. It stands, he said, his voice lower now. Untouched. The stranger joined him. It was not meant to fall. Edric circled slowly, his gaze tracing the lines along the stone. These markings, they are not random. No. They tell something. They do. Edric paused at one side of the pillar, his hand hovering just above its surface. What do they say? The stranger watched him. They do not speak in words. Edric's hand moved closer, until at last his fingers brushed the stone. The moment contact was made, the tone shifted, not in sound, but in feeling. It deepened, resonating through the ground, through the air, through him. Edric stilled, his breath slowed. The lines beneath his hand seemed to carry motion, not seen but sensed, as though the path they formed extended beyond the stone itself. He closed his eyes, just for a moment, and in that moment, something passed. Not a vision, not a memory of his own, but a presence. A movement along a road long walked, steps taken not by one but by many, a journey without beginning or end. Edric withdrew his hand. The tone returned to what it had been. He opened his eyes. This place, he said, his voice quieter than before. It holds them. The stranger gave a slight nod. Yes. Edric looked at him. Not as they were, not in flesh. No. But as something that remains. Yes. Edric turned back to the pillar. And we are meant to find this. We are meant to reach it. Edric exhaled slowly. And now that we have. The stranger's gaze moved upward, following the lines of the stone as they rose into the night. Now, he said, the road continues. Edric looked beyond the pillar. The land stretched onward once more, though its shape was less clear now, as if it lay just beyond the reach of sight. The fox stood near the far side of the pillar, waiting. It did not move. It did not call. It simply remained. Edric stepped away from the stone. There is more ahead. There is. Edric gave a small nod. Then we have not yet reached the end of this road. The stranger's voice was steady. No. Edric adjusted his grip on the reins, his posture unchanged, yet carrying something new. Not weight, but awareness. Then we follow still. The fox turned, and without hesitation, it moved forward once more, leading them beyond the standing stone toward whatever lay further along the path that had remembered them. The path beyond the standing stone did not reveal itself all at once. It unfolded slowly, as though the land waited for each step before offering the next. The ridges softened, the ground leveled, and the sense of direction, once clear, gave way to something quieter, less defined, yet no less certain. The fox moved ahead, though now its pace had eased. It no longer guided with urgency, nor did it trace a line so deliberate as before. Instead, it walked as one who had brought others where they needed to be, and now simply remained until the moment had passed. Edric followed, his steps measured, his gaze steady upon the land before him. The tone that had lingered near the pillar faded gradually, not disappearing, but settling into the earth as though it had returned to its resting place. For a while, neither he nor the stranger spoke. There was no need. The road, if it could still be called that, carried them forward without question. The grasses rose again around them, moving now with the wind once more, their rhythm familiar, their motion no longer shaped by something unseen. Edric drew a slow breath. "The plains return," he said. The stranger walked beside him. "They do." Edric glanced to either side. "The land feels as it should." "Yes?" He looked ahead. "And yet, not entirely." The stranger gave a slight nod. "You have walked further than you did before." Edric considered this, then gave a faint, thoughtful exhale. "I suppose I have." The fox slowed. It came to a gentle stop upon a small rise where the land opened wide once more beneath the night sky. There it turned, its gaze resting briefly upon Edric, then upon the stranger. No sound passed between them, no signal, no command. And yet, something was understood. Edric stepped forward. The fox remained still. For a moment they regarded one another, man and creature bound only by the path they had shared. Then, as simply as it had come, the fox turned away. It moved into the grasses, its form blending with the motion of the land, until at last it could no longer be seen. Edric stood where he was. "It leaves us here." The stranger's voice came quietly. "Yes." Edric looked out across the plains. The horizon stretched far and unbroken, the stars above steady in their quiet watch. "This place," he said, "it is known to me." "It is." Edric turned slightly, his gaze tracing the shape of the land. "There should be a stream to the east," he said, "and beyond it a line of low trees." The stranger followed his gaze. "There is." Edric nodded. "Then we have returned." The stranger did not answer at once. After a moment he spoke. "We have come to where the road meets the world again." Edric let out a slow breath. "That is as close to returning as such a road allows." "Yes." They stood together upon the rise, their horses calm behind them, the wind moving gently across the plains, as it had done long before their steps had crossed into places unseen. Edric reached into his cloak and drew forth the small carved token once more. He held it in his hand, turning it slightly as the faint light of the stars caught its worn edges. "For years," he said, "I carried this without knowing why." The stranger's gaze rested upon it. "And now?" Edric looked at the carving, the shape of the horse's head, smoothed by time, shaped by hands long past. "Now," he said, "I think it remembers as the road does." The stranger inclined his head. "Yes." Edric closed his fingers around it, then returned it to its place within his cloak. For a while, they remained there. Then Edric turned. "You will not ride further with me." It was not a question. The stranger met his gaze. "No." Edric nodded, accepting this without resistance. "There are roads that do not favor company." The faintest trace of a smile touched the stranger's expression. "And others that part as they must." Edric gave a small breath that might have been the beginning of a laugh, though it did not fully form. "Yes," he said, "that as well." He stepped toward his horse, resting a hand along her neck before mounting with practiced ease. The mare shifted beneath him, steady and ready. Edric looked once more toward the stranger. "If I ride again beneath such a sky," he said, "and feel the wind change, will I find this road once more?" The stranger's answer came without hesitation. "You will know where to look." Edric held his gaze for a moment longer. Then he inclined his head. "That is enough." He turned his horse toward the east, where the land dipped gently toward the unseen stream. For a few steps, he did not ride. He allowed the mare to walk, her pace unhurried, her path certain. Then, with a light touch of the reins, he urged her forward. The rhythm of hooves returned to the plains, steady and familiar. Edric did not look back, not at once. But as he reached the crest of the next rise, he turned his head slightly. The place where the stranger had stood was empty. No figure remained, only the open land, stretching wide beneath the quiet sky. Edric watched it for a moment. Then he faced forward once more. The road ahead lay clear. The wind moved gently across the grasses, carrying with it the faintest sense of something remembered, not distant, not lost, but simply there. And as the rider of Rohan continued on his way, the night held him within its vast and steady embrace, the plains unfolding beneath him as they always had, yet now, with a path beneath them that he would never again walk without knowing it was there.